Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, with the year coming to a close and the tower entering the beta in a couple of weeks, it seemed like a good time to step back and do a roundup of how each of the classes are doing when compared against each other, and what builds are at the top of the pack for each class according to pit tier rankings, to sort of help you prepare a bit for the tower activity when it comes out soon. If you want to try swapping to a new build to get ready for it, we'll be going over the ones that are generally top performing at the moment, and if you also want to change classes before it's out, now is probably the time to do so you can get properly set up before the tower comes out so that you can run the tower at high power. Rhyming aside, let's get into it today, and I'll be going in reverse power order, meaning weakest to start, strongest to end, with the slight caveat that outside of specifically the one at the top being absolutely incredibly powerful, every other class's top pit tier completions are within 8 tiers of each other, so it is quite a balanced season overall between them, and in a lot of cases, the difference between top runs for some of the classes is entirely dependent on how good their sanctification luck has been for the player that's doing them, because the existence of mythic unique effects as sanctifies adds a whole load of randomness to who has the best build for each class. That said, first up, let's talk about the Necromancer, whose highest pit tier clear this season is a 116. The fun part for Necro is that there are 2 different players with 2 different builds within about 14 seconds of each other's clear time. The build that's ahead by a few seconds I won't be showing on screen, as the player has asked people not to share the run around, but it is a build focused around the Shadowblight key passive, just built around proccing that as frequently and powerfully as possible, with things like the Blighted aspect to increase consecutive hits from the key passive itself, the Decay aspect to scale Shadowblight damage further, and then just lots of general shadow damage scaling for the most part past that, with a full set of sacrifices getting rid of all of their minions. On the other side of things, also with a 116 tier completion, we have Bloodwave Necromancer, with the Bloodwave first turning it into a darkness skill, then using Bloodless Scream to make it chill and freeze enemies and do loads of bonus damage to frozen enemies too. These are basically the same builds that have been at the top of Necromancer rankings for multiple seasons, with some slight variations each time of course, and it is also worth mentioning that the new triple Golem builds based around the new Grave Bloom unique is also only a couple of tiers behind, with a Golem focused build having a tier 114 completion. So Necromancer is the lowest rank of the classes, but a lot of comparable builds at the high end that it can do. Next up then, let's talk about Sorcerer. Sorcerer and Spiritborn both have tier 120 pit tier completions, but Sorcerer's is a little bit slower, so you can look at them sort of like A and B rather than fully separate rankings from each other. That said, top of Sorcerer, pretty much every build doing any remotely high tier pit runs is Crackling Energy. It's the fastest because of the cooldown reductions for teleport, but it's also just the best scaling build into deep endgame this season by a large amount, with most of that being based around Esidora's Overflowing Cameo, the unique amulet that both scales the damage itself ridiculously, but also makes you unleash all charges of Crackling Energy when you hit maximum charges, with a ton of bonus damage as well. And the new Orsavane unique weapon, which gives you a bunch of bonus damage for the amount of defensive skills that you don't use. A common theme among most of the top pit tier runs across all the classes is just insane sanctification. This player in this footage, for example, has Harlequin Crest mythic effect sanctified onto their boots, Grandfather's mythic effect sanctified onto their pants, Starless Skies mythic effect sanctified onto their amulet, and then just a bunch of other great bonus on the rest of their gear too. But just to sort of give you an example of the type of RNG that players have had to hit to reach these accomplishments in Season 11. Moving on, we have Spiritborn, also has top pit tier completion of 120 at the moment, but just a little bit faster than Sorcerer. Spiritborn's top performing build by a decent margin right now is actually Payback focused Spiritborn, with the Rod of Kepaleke unique effect around it too, treating it as a core skill and then smashing it into the enemy to deal loads of damage in response for your resource. Then using runes to make it guaranteed overpowers on top of the guaranteed crits, and just scaling loads of damage based around that concept. Only a few tiers behind that then is the Evade build for Spiritborn 2, which is based heavily around Stormfeather damage, which is achieved through the Eagle Spirit Hall, letting you fire out Stormfeathers whenever you dodge, and then just building an infinite cycle of evades so that you can spam them and shoot out Stormfeathers pretty much just endlessly, with things like the Loyalty's Mantle Helmet that gives a bunch of bonus Spirit Hall potency, and same thing with the Wishinakpa unique weapon, which I could never pronounce correctly. These two builds aren't quite equal in power. The Payback build is definitely a little bit above, but this is another class with 2 different builds achieving very high pit tier completions. After that, we move up to the next sort of tier of pit tier completion with Druid, who has completed a tier 123. Same as Rogue, who we'll be talking about in a minute, but again, Druid's clear of a 123 is a little bit slower. That said, Druid is using the Pulverize build that has been going on for a few seasons at the top of Druid now, based around the Rotted Lightbringer unique item that makes poison puddles pop up when you pulverize, and then you can splash around in the poison puddles, spamming Pulverize in them to shoot the poison damage around at the enemies surrounding you. It's just a perfect sort of build archetype for the gameplay that the pit has. This one is really not that complex, not a whole lot seemingly different from how it worked in previous seasons, and the next best build for the class has only reached a tier 105 pit completion in comparison, but that was done with a companion skill focused build, which is fun to see doing that well at least. Next up then, also completing a tier 123 at its peak, let's talk about the Rogue, who a lot of people, including myself, expected to be in a much worse position before the season started. That said, we didn't know about mythic unique effect Sanctification being possible until the season released, and Rogue is one of two classes with a higher than average number of equipment slots, which means more equipment that can be sanctified, and so the stronger Sanctification is as a mechanic, the better Rogue is, of course, and we seem to have hit that breakpoint where it is one of the best classes as a result. That said, the main build that is popping off in pits at least is based around Heartseeker, which is another classic build that's been around at a high level for quite a while, either as one of the top 3 or so builds, or even the top build for the class for multiple seasons in a row, but with one of the main uniques being one that was added last season, Orphan Maker. This makes basic and core skills have to reload between uses, but increases their damage dramatically. Heartseeker is a basic skill, and then they combine that with a bunch of different ways to increase basic skill damage past that. Paingorger's Gauntlet, Shard of Varath, the Moonrise legendary aspect, and then just a bunch of strong mythic unique effects as well, of course, to make it all come together. In with the second highest pit tier completion that we have then, Barbarian with a tier 124. The top build is a wild Hammer of the Ancient centric setup with just loads of bleed build up to pop with Rupture, but the player that did that run is also one who has asked for their pit run not to be shared around too much, but literally 1 minute slower than that, but still within tier 124. We also have Lunging Strike basic skill builds doing extremely well, and these are built around similar things as the Rogue build that we just talked about, all of the basic skill boosting effects that you can cram in, and the Hooves of the Mountain God unique boots, which are a unique basic skill booster for Barbarian specifically, causing you to constantly drain Fury, but increase basic skill damage when you do and make them cleave and stuff like that too. And like what I mentioned about Rogue having more than average equipment slots, Barbarian has even more than Rogue does, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the two classes with more slots than the others are so high up the rankings in a season where Sanctification is a big deal, and so inventory slots are an even bigger deal than normal. Finally then, this one is probably not a big surprise to anyone, but the top class by pit tier completion is Paladin with a tier 140. Yes, a tier 140 pit tier completion. This is being done with the Judgment Focus build, which is the effect that you can place on enemies and then pop for a bunch of damage. It uses the Judgment Oath to increase that damage and make it apply a stacking damage taken debuff to enemies, and then just focusing on building up those procs as much as possible, both in terms of frequency and damage, which in a fun twist to how it now works, through also taking advantage of the Ascendant legendary aspect, which scales up your damage the more times that you use skills that would put you in Arbiter form while already in Arbiter form, and the Celestial Strife aspect, which increases vulnerable damage the more enemies that you kill while in Arbiter form before leaving it. And these are the basis of the Arbiter build, a fully separate Paladin build, which is quite strong in its own right, but this one does it without the Disciple Oath, and instead just by having super long duration on Arbiter and low cooldown on the Arbiter of Justice ultimate skill, and just slowly building up the buffs through the ultimate itself at the start of the pit run, then using the extra damage scaling that you get from that to pump into the Judgment procs themselves, which was a recent change made to the build, capable of more damage for bosses at the end of the activity specifically. And this build has some ridiculous sanctifying going on too, including Harlequin Crest's mythic effect on the shield, Starless Sky's mythic effect on the boots, Grandfather mythic effect on top of the Heir of Perdition mythic unique helmet, and I am very jealous of the luck that Rob seems to have. And while that's not necessarily unique to Paladin in any way, all of these top builds have crazy sanctifying, but Paladin's base power level is high enough that the Sanctification just amplifies the hell out of the gap, as well as it being the most played class, making the most opportunities for players to get crazy Sanctification too. All that to say then, every class is in a surprisingly good place. Paladin definitely needs at least a little bit of reining in for next season, I would say. Probably even something as simple as putting a cap on the bonus from the Castle legendary paragon node that scales damage off of armor. That would probably be enough, but knowing the developers, they would rather leave it super broken than nerf it too hard, especially this soon after the class was added to the game, so we'll have to see what they choose to do. That said, the other 6 classes are very close together at this moment, with multiple of those having more than one build at their peak of power too, which is quite a fun state of the game to see. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A roundup of the current state of the classes compared to each other and the best builds for each one, with the idea of giving you some sort of direction to push towards if you care about pushing the new tower activity as much as possible once that does release. As usual with these types of build collection videos, if you want more information on these builds, I highly recommend going to the creators creators' channels that I have been showing on the screen for each section, as they have played these builds for countless hours and perfected them as much as they can. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.